Okay. Hey, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm Patrick Albano. I'm going to be interviewing Linda today, and I am with the Trade Desk. We're a platform to plan and buy TV and digital advertising. And Linda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, Linda Lee, and I'm kind of like, do I look like that anymore? I don't know.
I definitely
In
don't
real
look like
life versus digital. Linda Lee, I am the Chief Marketing Officer at the Campbell Soup Company. Great to see everyone.
Well, great. Do you mind if we start with some personal questions?
No.
Okay. Just two quick ones before we get into business. So you work in soup all day, every day. Do you want to tell us your earliest memories of soup as a child?
Sure. So I think Patrick actually, he did a little digging, and I was surprised he had even this question for me because it was buried away, I think. I grew up in an immigrant family where pretty much 95% of our meals was Chinese, and what that meant was a soup every night. My mom always had a soup. And because of that, soup was just a part of my life, a part of every dinner. And when this role came upon me, firstly, I'm always like, can I personally connect with the brand, with the category? And soup, obviously, I have a fond love of it and a real belief in it.
That's amazing. One of the other things I think a lot about, too, is the changing role of a CMO, and I'm sure everyone here who works in marketing thinks about that, too. You have a really different background. You majored in chemical engineering and then worked in data and insights for the first part of your career. I'm curious if you think that the role of a CMO now has to include something that's a little bit more scientific, a little bit more data-driven. Any advice for the group here?
I would say absolutely. I think because I grew up in large CPG, I believed that marketing was not an expense, but was an investment. So when you think of the P&L, it's an investment line, and how do you optimize the performance? So when performance marketing kind of as a term came up, I remember thinking, wait, haven't we been doing that this entire time? Shouldn't we always be thinking about all of our spending as investment? How do we measure it, and how do we optimize that? And I think that has always been the case in big CPG, but what has happened is the availability of data, and I know we'll probably touch on retail media and retail data. The availability, that speed as well as volume, it just makes it absolutely critical to be able to process that, not just analyze it, but also understand modeling and understanding predictive analytics and bringing that into the conversation. I think that's how you gain the credibility with your CFO and make your CFO your best friend rather than the person who's really trying to cut your budget, and certainly the CEO.
That's a really interesting topic, the best friendship between the CFO and the CMO. I think it's a key relationship. So one of the big themes of the next few days is sports marketing, and I think we all know what winning in sports is, but Campbell's has had this strategy around winning in soup, and I wonder if you could explain to the group and tell us a little bit more about what does it look like to win in soup?
Sure. It sounds obvious that since we're the Campbell Soup Company, we should absolutely be aiming to win in soup. But this was a strategy, a rally that was put in place in the fall of 2019. And it was because the entire decade prior, our business was in decline. And so this is a long-term decline of a bedrock of a business for us. And that is actually, call it crazy, that is the reason why I joined Campbell's, was to be a part of this turnaround. And we've been on that journey.
Can you tell us, so you joined the company, I think, just pre-pandemic, and so maybe the journey you imagined would be ahead was slightly different than the journey you actually experienced. So maybe you could talk us through a little bit of like how you navigated that win in soup strategy through the pandemic, and then maybe probably interesting for us all to hear like what's next.
Sure. The first year, I would say the focus, or I'd say the original plan was, let's take a look at our touch points. First being the food. Let's make sure that the food, how people eat, what they expect in their food has changed, it's evolved. We reformulated nearly all of our food to ensure that we were relevant to millennials, and that was the target in Win in Soup. It wasn't just Win in Soup amongst all. Sure, that's always the case, but laser targeted to the younger generation. The second was in our communications, in thinking in the sense of like big campaigns. This is a billion-dollar brand, and therefore making sure that the paid aspect was working hardest. And then the third was around packaging. That's when I say that's our single biggest touch point with consumers. Let's make sure that piece is clean, it really feels modern, looks modern, is simple. That was, I'd say, the third piece. And all of this happened before the pandemic. And the good thing is we had that strategy in place. We had what I call the first level of the house of strengthening that, which we saw good response from millennials. And then the pandemic hit. Pandemic hits in March 2020. And I remember distinctly, we stopped all marketing, and at that time, it was a bit of, is this appropriate? I remember having that conversation of, is it appropriate to even be advertising at this point in time? And we decided, absolutely, if it brings comfort or utility to our consumers. People were buying a ton of soup, way more than we would have ever imagined. And my concern was, people are having to make a lot of meals. How do we help? And I know that was another conversation prior to us of thinking, putting ourselves into having empathy. We were part of our consumers' lives, how to help them. And that was the first, like what's the filter? And then the second was double down. We actually ended up doubling down on marketing, knowing that there was a need and we could fulfill that need. So it accelerated our goals, but then it actually caused us to really shift. And where I touched on kind of the big levers, we actually added new levers of recognizing we needed to keep the pulse of the consumers in our lives. All of us were involved, obviously affected. What was changing? And as people's lives and needs were changing, what can we then do? So the pace of marketing really shifted during the pandemic.
It was such an interesting time because I think if we all lived it, obviously, and it felt like our day-to-day was changing day-to-day. I'm just curious how, and especially for if you had a target consumer group, a group of millennials, like how did you keep an eye on what the right trend and message was and mirror marketing to be kind of the moment and appropriate?
It was making it a process. Actually, we created a group called Culture Vultures, and it's a combination of our media team, our creative team, and our internal integrated marketing team. And they meet on a weekly basis to share what's inspiring, themselves, seeing what's trending. But then the key is, are we going to just watch it? Are we going to actually build it, do something? Or are we going to bin it and kind of move away? And trying to get to that action of seeing what's going on, but then making a conscious decision of what we're going to do with that. So that was a major thing that's changed.
Should we look at some of the creative that came out of that?
Sure. So this is actually what I'll share is these are the, I'll call it TV spots, the bigger paid. But what I'll share in the first two, this was before the pandemic. And it's two spots really wanting to tap into the truth of the brand, but making sure that it's coming through in a more modern way where you'll see that music plays a role in that. But I'll also point out between the two, the first was the first year, the second one we cleaned it up for the second year, you'll see that the packaging changes. And so I just wanted to note that. So we'll play this first one.
Thank you for being a friend. Travel down the road and back again. Your heart is true, you're a pal and a confidant. For this, I'm so thankful to you, to you, to you, to you, to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so iconic moments of Campbell's. Yep.
I'm sure we have some Hamilton fans, and there's the song "In the Room Where It Happens," and I want to hear what is it like in the room where you walk in and say, "I want to change the Campbell's brand logo after how many years of history?" How does that go down?
Here's the funny thing. It really wasn't hard. And it is pretty amazing because in joining Campbell, I had been told, this is a board that the family members are a part of, even though we're a public company, very, very, very deep roots. And it can sometimes be difficult to doing something bold and really making even small changes to such an iconic brand. But I think this is a little of when you're able to rally everyone to that, and win in soup, and it starts with red and white, what we reference condensed soup as red and white, and you bring people along in the storytelling of why. I always start with why, we're going where we're going and why the changes, before then sharing, that we touched the logo. Whoa, that was definitely not in scope. But I think the key for me, and this is maybe the little tip, is a lot of the creative is come across very subjective. And I think the key is to make sure you've got the data to ensure that you remove that subjectivity, which can often become a debate of, I think it's a useless debate, it's difficult to win. And so that was a bit of probably just my approach to doing big things, is bringing people along, but making sure you have the data before you share something, and have a little room at the end to make any tweaks that you do need to make, but they become very little once you've got the data on the major pieces.
That's great. That's the scientist background. That's amazing. So keeping on that path and your best friendship with your CFO, how do you measure whether you're winning in soup or not? What's the scorecard?
The scorecard, firstly, is obviously millennials. That is full stop. Are we winning with them? And absolutely, they are. I'd say it's exceeded our expectations of how much they are literally the center of our growth right now. And that's fantastic. And, certainly pandemic gave us just amazing tailwinds, but we're now, starting into year 3, which is incredible, how long this has been. And to be able to continue to attract and retain millennials, even as our worlds open up again, that has been the primary metric. The second one for me, and it's kind of pulling it back to that CFO being my best friend, we do annual marketing mixes. So we do front-end metrics, and those are helpful. But I personally believe for such a large budget, it's important to also be able to bring forth a true marketing mix and to utilize that to ensure that we're continuing to not just be able to maintain our budgets, but to actually add more dollars into that budget because of the confidence in the returns remaining high, despite the fact we shifted from retention to acquisition, which we all know acquisition just simply is less efficient.
Yeah, on Campbell's earnings calls, your CEO and CFO often talk about the ROI of marketing, which is, flips that whole script from is marketing a cost center versus, we keep investing because we're turning around revenue. That's amazing. So we're coming out of the pandemic. This is my first in-person event, so it's good to see you all. But we're kind of in the mode now where you as a marketer are probably thinking about what habits stick from the ones that started. So from a consumer perspective, what do you think is going to stick that's most important for your business?
Kind of 3 quick things. So the first is lunch. Sounds simple, but lunch prepared at home, that's going to continue to stick. Even as folks return to work, we're seeing people bring things from home into the office. The second is cooking skills. So whether you want it or not, whether you enjoyed it or not, all of our cooking skills just got better during the pandemic, and so everyone's just comfort in that has raised, and for us that means, well, how do we keep it interesting, of course, from an innovation side. And the third is e-com, and I know depending on what category or industry you're in, you're on different paths of that. For us in food, we were definitely a laggard in e-com, but that accelerated by at least 5 years.
Could we get a show of hands of whose cookie skills got better during the pandemic? All right. Well done. I think that's a really interesting perspective on sort of the consumer behaviors. If we can flip that a little into the industry trends that accelerated during the pandemic, I've worked in advertising and digital advertising specifically my whole career, and I think for a long time it was sort of in a little bucket, and it was TV, digital, and now I think over the past few years, though, television has become connected, and it's all digital now, and even retail media, which you touched on with e-commerce. So can you talk about those two trends, just how you see as a marketer television changing, and then maybe retail media, and if that impacts the way you think about marketing?
Sure. So I think the first thing is, what is television, right? What is TV these days? And recently, my head of integrated marketing and I were talking actually about that, and we said, I think it's really about big screens and little screens, live and streaming. So if you think of that as a 2x2 matrix, there's a role for each, actually. It's about finding the right tool for the right audience, the right job. So that's, for me, if you want to say linear TV, I actually think that continues to have a role. For us in 2019, 40% of the media mix was in linear. Last year is 28. So it's coming down, but it is still a part of that mix, and it's still material. And then retail media, wow. I think as a marketer, it depends, I think, what company you're in and how it's structured. We would think of retail media historically as, that's shopper, and that sits in sales. It's part of the customer relationship. It's a small percentage. I'm not going to worry about it. I personally would not even see the creative or the work. And now that's totally different. Guys, this is not, should we be in retail media? We will be. This will continue to grow. The ability to connect sales and marketing data, that's awesome when you don't own your sales channels. But the key on us is making sure that we can actually, number one, have access to the right data, have the right skills to manipulate, to utilize in the right time, so that we're optimizing. What my biggest fear of is not spending more, it's spending more and not having visibility to performance and ability to optimize. But as the partnerships like the Trade Desk, Meredith, these partners coming into the space absolutely validates that this is just going to be what it is.
Yeah, and I don't know sometimes if I'm smoking the industry stuff because we work in marketing and advertising, but it seems to me that's a better consumer experience too if everything's measurable and you put the right ad in front of the right person. Do you think that is a better consumer, have personalized advertising?
Yeah, if you're actually able to utilize, right? The power's there. The power's there to make it a better consumer experience, and certainly you then add on just identifiers, changing, shifting. It becomes more and more important for that access to first party.
I play a fun game when I'm watching connected television. I try to guess why I'm seeing the ad, because what did I do online that triggered that ad to be targeted towards me? Does anybody have any questions before I continue on? Yep.
Hi. Absolutely, and thank you. Thank you so much for your kind and generous words. The easy answer is not all, clients are the same, and the easy answer is to look for the ones who actually get it, right? Who can make that pivot. But you don't always get to choose who your client is. But I'd first start there of trying to segment a little of your client and how adept are they at that. Ultimately, I do think this is the thing around CEOs and CFOs. It's not that really is the audience. So while sure there's a CMO that's a part of that. Ultimately, as a CMO, I am in service to the business, and it is so critical to be able to translate the work, the creative, the idea to what's it going to do for the business. And so understanding what the strategy is, what's that metric, if you're able to connect the two, you're just going to get, I think, a little more openness of wait, you understand what the business challenge is or what our goal is. I have found that to be probably the biggest difference of when I've been presented work, of when it just lives in the creative space for the sake of creativity. That's when it does, it's difficult to move forward.
That's great advice. And all right, I'm gonna do a quick round of rapid fire questions. If you could, you don't have to be rapid in your answers. My question. So you mentioned why and the why of marketing. We probably have a bunch of people who have seen it. Simon Sinek talk start with why. Mm-hmm. So I'd be curious to get your answer to why these aspects of Campbell marketing. And I don't know, the first one might be a deep cut. Why red and white?
So this is a fun story. The can used to be blue and orange. And in 1898, the treasurer was at the annual Penn and Cornell football game, which was also known as the Mud Bowl. And as such, he noticed that everything on the field, everything was brown. But the Cornell outfit, uniform, which is red and white, it still stood out. And that was actually the reason for the change to red and white, was to stand out at shelf. So a little fun fact. And also, I went to Cornell, and I didn't know this story until I joined Campbell's.
So you grew up eating soup, went to Cornell, and this is destiny, really.
I know, it really is.
That's a cool story. Okay, and along those lines, you've probably seen Andy Warhol's take on the Campbell's logo, and over the past few years, you've released an NFT with the new logo. So why NFT?
I love to constantly know what's going on, to experiment. I really advocate for my teams to do that. But when you have an iconic brand, it is really, for me, it's so important that we don't come across as posers in trying too hard, especially when we're trying to modernize this brand, attract younger consumers. And for, NFT, there's a lot of buzzwords around crypto, around metaverse, 3.0, all of these things. The NFT made sense, though, for red and white, was because we had a new logo, we had a new label, and knowing that the Warhol roots in art culture were so strong, it just felt very connected to our past, but in a modern way, which is, and it was specifically an artwork NFT, and picking an artist who is young and emerging. It just felt like we were operating in a space that we could. And I'd say the response of the public, whether it's media or consumers, was again, exceeded our expectations. I think that validated that we weren't entering into something that made us look like we were trying too hard.
Yeah, and I think you actually were early on the trend, too, so it didn't look like you were jumping on the bandwagon either. Okay, so the theme of the day being sports as well. Why does Chunky Soup show up in Madden? Madden football game.
Yeah, Chunky and NFL have a long history, and it was the summer of 2020 as we were planning for the next season. At that time, none of us knew whether or not there would be live NFL games. And in fact, there ended up not being. But at the time, we didn't know. And we needed to pivot a bit and say, well, what else can we be doing that's relevant in the moment? And we saw that gaming was actually, it's always been on growing and rising, but it really had taken off. And it felt like all the stars aligned with the release of Madden 21, and then in our ambition of bringing in younger households. It actually, I think it helped leap us a little in that modernization of realizing, football in the traditional sense, that isn't the only way sports are enjoyed and watched these days. So it ended up being something we just went and did, and it being one of the highest ROIs for the year for activation.
Yeah, and the integration to the game is actually kind of neat because as a player, you get extra advantage and value from the Campbell's experience. So it's the brand giving you value back as in your kind of natural environment.
You got fuel points, I think.
Fuel
so
points.
that was really
that.
back to like authenticity of the brand, fueling your day. You know, the soup that eats like a meal. You got extra fuel points.
It's a better way to redefine calories. I love that. Okay, final question. So collaborations are something really big, and I think one of the most long-term famous collaborations, which we saw in one of those spots, was the cream of mushroom soup, which shows up on a lot of Thanksgiving tables in the green bean casserole. So why does it taste so good? What's the magic?
Well, he kind of just gave it away. He said magic. It is. So I didn't grow up cooking with condensed soup. We didn't have it at home, and if we did, it was my dad likes cream of mushroom soup for some reason, and it was just as an eating soup. I didn't have my first green bean casserole made with Campbell's until I joined. And of course, now I'm obsessed with understanding why the love of all things Campbell's condensed. And that includes consumers really immersing with them, but also myself using it. And I would say that's been the aha for me, is cooking with it myself. And the best, we talk about this often, of like, what is it? It is really, in the small little can, the perfect blend of flavor and texture, comforting texture that you just can't replicate. And the key is you just literally, if you're adding just green beans to it and maybe sprinkle a little fried onion, it's amazing. And so it's a good maybe just end. We'll close this with the last spot, which is this came out this was, again, not part of the brief of turning around soup, but what we realized was, wow, we're bringing in consumers and younger consumers, and we're bringing them in through those memories that you saw in the first two spots. But actually, there is this magic in a can of how to put a good meal on the table easily, and how do we get consumers who didn't grow up with condensed, like myself, how do we start to help people understand what you can do with this small little can? So we'll take a look at the latest spot.
Let's see the magic.
Here we are again. What's for dinner? Oh, hello, friend. Time to make some magic. Now we're talking. Toss this in. That smells good. Now that's magic.
Do you believe in magic?
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much. Why don't we give a hand for Linda Lee? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.